Adeline, I wanted to take the time now to talk to you a bit about safety behaviours. Is this a term that you've come across before?
Not really, no.
Well, let me tell you a little bit about what we mean by safety behaviours. Safety behaviours are subtle avoidance behaviours that people often use to prevent their fears from coming true, or as a way of trying to feel less anxious when they're approaching a particular situation. If we believe that a situation isn't going to go well, then we're likely to feel anxious and want to avoid the situation. But if we can't avoid the situation altogether, then often people will use kind of subtle avoidance behaviours when they're in the situation, or kind of precautionary behaviours to prevent their fears from coming true. And this is what we understand to be safety behaviours. So let me give you an example of that. Let's say that I was concerned about talking to my peers in social situations. Let's say that I was afraid that I might say something stupid or that I might embarrass myself. As a result of those fears, I might go along to the social situation and actually stay quiet as a way of preventing my fears from coming true. In this example, whilst I'm not avoiding the social situation altogether, I'm using staying quiet as a way of preventing my fears from coming true. And as a result, we'd call those a safety behaviour. Let me give you another example. So let's say I was highly anxious about my mouth becoming dry and choking when I'm out in public. As a result of that, I might bring my water bottle along everywhere I go, and I might take regular sips from my water bottle throughout the day. In this scenario, using my water bottle or taking it everywhere with me and having regular sips throughout the day could be seen as a safety behaviour, because I'm using it as a way of preventing my fear of choking from coming true. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I do notice that I probably do quite a few of those things that you're talking about.
Okay. They can be really sneaky and subtle, these safety behaviours, so it can be really helpful to try and uncover them as part of treatment and work on dropping them. Now, when we think about safety behaviours though, they can look different for different people. It's not what you do, but why you're doing it that's most important. So it's the function of the behaviour that deems it to be a safety behaviour. Let's take my most recent example, right? So we were talking about an example of a safety behaviour being walking around with a water bottle in public. Now, I imagine a lot of people might walk around with a water bottle in public and it might not be a safety behaviour for them at all. But in this case, we're calling it a safety behaviour because it's a way of reducing anxiety and preventing a person's fears from coming true, getting a dry mouth and choking. So it's the function of the behaviour that's most important rather than the behaviour itself. Does that idea make sense?
Yeah.
So if you're unsure whether something's a safety behaviour or not, it can be helpful to ask yourself, how anxious would I feel if I wasn't to use this behaviour? And if the answer to that is, I'd feel anxious, then it's probably a good indication that a safety behaviour is at play. Okay. So Adeline, when you think about your social anxiety, can you think of any examples of safety behaviours that you might use to reduce your anxiety in social situations?
Yeah, I guess the first one that comes to mind is that I wear my headphones quite a lot. Like even coming in today on the bus, I had my headphones on. And I always have to check whether they're in my bag before I leave the house. Otherwise, I get quite anxious if I can't find them.
And what would you be afraid would happen if you didn't wear your headphones when you left the house?
I guess I'm anxious that someone might stop me and ask for directions or ask me a question and I wouldn't know what to say to them.
Right. And when you're wearing the headphones in public, how do you feel?
I feel a bit less anxious because I'm just kind of distracting myself, and I guess not many people come to talk to me. So
it feels like it's preventing your fears from coming true in that it's stopping people from approaching you. Because what would be bad about if somebody came up and talked to you?
Well, I'm really worried that they might ask me something that I don't know how to answer, and then I'll start getting all flustered and looking really anxious. I might say something really stupid in response.
Right, so people will approach me. I won't be able to answer them. I'll say something stupid.
Yeah, or my mind will go blank.
It makes sense that you'd be using this safety behaviour if it's reducing your anxiety and it feels like it's preventing your fears from coming true, like it's reducing the likelihood that people are going to approach you, that you won't be able to answer them, that you'll say something stupid and that your mind will go blank. But can you think of any ways in which actually the use of this safety behaviour could backfire and actually serve to keep your social anxiety going?
I mean, I guess I don't know whether people would actually approach me because, like on the bus, it's not like everyone gets asked a question, and most people don't wear their headphones anyway.
Absolutely. It actually doesn't give you the opportunity to find out once and for all whether your fears were going to come true anyway, right? So we never get to find out any evidence that disconfirms those negative predictions. So as a result of that, every time you enter into a public situation, how are you likely to feel?
I feel quite anxious.
Yeah, absolutely. So we rely on the safety behaviour. In the short term, it might help us feel less anxious and feel like it's preventing our fears from coming true. But in the long term, we never get to test out the fear. Now, have you ever had a scenario where you've used a safety behaviour and it's actually backfired and maybe kind of created the negative predictions or negative fears that you were trying to prevent?
I guess there have been times in which I've been wearing headphones and haven't been able to kind of hear what's going on around me, and that's just made me worry more. Like, you can see what's happening around you, but not being able to hear it, I get anxious about not having that information around me.
Yeah, right. So whilst you're using the safety behaviour to help you to feel less anxious, it sounds like sometimes it actually backfires and makes you feel more anxious because you don't have an opportunity to find out what's going on around you and actually hear what other people are saying and doing.
Absolutely. Right. Like, there are some times when I can see people looking in my direction and they're saying something, but because I can't hear, I don't know whether they're actually trying to say something to me or they're just talking to each other, and that just gets me really worried.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes sense, right? It's really common when we're talking about safety behaviours for them to actually backfire. So one example could be using alcohol in a social situation. Often people who are feeling anxious might use alcohol as a bit of a social lubricant, but at other times it can actually backfire and people may be vulnerable to over drinking or drinking too much. And as a result of that, they may actually behave in ways that they didn't want to and actually receive negative feedback from other people that they were trying to prevent. So it's just another example of how a safety behaviour can actually backfire and could create a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy where our fears actually come true as a result of using the safety behaviour. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And Adeline, when things go well when you leave the house, right, and you've used your headphones, say people don't come up to you, you don't find yourself in a scenario where you have mind blanks or say something stupid, what do you put that down to?
Well, the headphones, like, I just can't see myself leaving the house without them.
Absolutely. So often what we'll find is when people are using a safety behaviour and they find their fears don't come true, they put that success down to the fact that they use the safety behaviour rather than the possibility that the feared outcome wasn't going to come true in the first place. And when that happens, how much more reliant do you think you then become on the safety behaviour?
Yeah, or much more. Like in this case, like there was once, I think the headphones dropped out of my bag or something and I hadn't checked before I left the house and I was panicking. I just had to leave.
Right, so you found that if you don't then have access to the headphones, access to the safety behaviour, you then feel more anxious or unable to leave the house?
Yeah.
Right, so increased anxiety.
Yeah. Or if I don't have it with me, then I have to leave the situation. Like I've had to kind of gotten to an appointment and realised I haven't got them or something like that and had to turn home.
Absolutely.
Yeah, go home.
And what then do you think happens to your self-esteem and your self-confidence over time?
I mean, I feel really anxious and I just don't feel confident about I mean, something as simple as taking the bus here just feels too overwhelming, and like I can't do it by myself without needing to rely on something like headphones.
Yeah, absolutely. We find that's really common. It's similar to the role of avoidance. It actually can chip away at our self-esteem and our self-confidence over time to the point that we become more and more reliant on our safety behaviours as a way of functioning. Now, one other thing I wanted to ask you is that when you are relying on your safety behaviours, say wearing the headphones when you're out in public, where do you notice your attention is?
I'm quite anxious and still worrying about, like, are other people looking at me? Do people think I'm weird? So I guess I'm focusing a lot on my worries.
So you're focusing a lot on yourself and your worries. Focused attention. It's another really common kind of impact of using a safety behaviour is that we tend to focus a lot of our attention on ourselves, on our anxiety, and using or relying on that safety behaviour. Can you think of any problems with that?
I guess that would just keep me feeling anxious because like those worries don't stop coming, and then I start to, like, my heart starts to race, I start to sweat, and then that just gets me pretty panicky.
Absolutely. It keeps us super focused on ourselves, super focused on our anxiety or anxiety symptoms, which can keep our anxiety going. But it also takes us away from our task at hand, right? So if we think about your social anxiety, the task at hand is usually having a conversation with your peers, right? Or interacting with other people in public spaces, for example. Now, if we're focusing all of our attention on ourselves or on the use of our safety behaviour, it's going to take us away from actually being really present in the interactions that we have with people. That's going to mean that we're going to be likely to miss kind of social cues. It's going to be really hard to pay attention to what's happening within the conversation. We're going to walk away with a real negative impression of how the situation went and only remember how anxious that we felt. So another really big problem when it comes to safety behaviours is that they keep us really focused on ourselves, which in turn can maintain our anxiety. Okay. Does that make sense, Adeline?
Yeah. And I can see that even when I'm wearing the headphones, sometimes 3 or 4 songs can pass and I can't even remember what I was listening to, so I'm not really even paying attention to the music, if you get what I mean.
Absolutely. So it's actually even taking you away from enjoying the music on the ride or being present when you're actually catching public transport or being out and about in public.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So whilst in the short term, the use of safety behaviours can give us this short-term relief, help us to feel less anxious when approaching a certain situation, and gives us this sense that it prevents our fears from coming true. Actually, in the long term, it can backfire. It never gives you the opportunity to test out your fears, to find out once and for all what actually happens when you expose yourself to these kinds of anxiety-provoking situations. As a result of that, it chips away at your confidence. It increases your reliance on the safety behaviour over time. And if you don't have access to it, it means that you're going to feel more anxious, or you're going to want to escape or avoid the situations even more, have stronger urges to do so. We know that they can backfire, right? So they can actually create the fears to come true that we're trying to avoid. And it can amp up that self-focused attention, which really just takes you away from being present focused in social situations, for this example. Right? So it's important in treatment that we actually practice dropping our safety behaviours, okay? To find out once and for all whether your negative predictions or your fears come true, okay? Now, we can do this in a couple of different ways. One way that we can do it is actually practice dropping your safety behaviours from the get-go altogether. Now, this might seem really scary, but it has some advantages. One of those being, when we drop a safety behaviour straight away, it gives us a great opportunity to find out what happens to these negative predictions or these fears. Are you approached by people? And when, or if and when you're approached by people, are you able to answer them? Do you say something stupid? Does your mind go blank? And by giving yourself an opportunity to really test out those negative fears or predictions, you're going to find out once and for all what happens. And hopefully in turn, that will help you to feel less anxious over time, particularly if you're finding that it goes better than expected. Now, people will find that when they go to drop their safety behaviours, in the short term, their anxiety will actually go up. Now this makes sense because it's activating all of these fears that you think if something bad's going to happen when you expose yourself to these situations. So it can feel quite daunting to think about dropping all your safety behaviours from the get-go.
Yeah.
So another approach that you can take is actually grading your safety behaviours. So grading, dropping your safety behaviours over time, starting with something that feels a bit easier to drop and then working your way up over time. Now, last week you and I spoke about developing a behavioural experiment aimed at exposing yourself to public spaces, going to catch public transport and actually finding out what happens when you do so. Now, remind me again what you found when you did that.
Well, coming in today is an example that I had tried, and I took the bus in by myself because usually I'd have to get a friend to come along with me. But I had to kind of keep my headphones on. I mean, I was quite pleased with myself because I rarely take public transport on my own.
Well done.
Especially given it's quite a long way to get to the clinic.
And what did you find when you did that, Adeline?
I mean, I guess no one came to ask me a question. Not many people were actually looking at me. People just kind of got on the bus and they were looking out the window or checking their phones. Yeah, but I guess after hearing what you said, I did have my headphones on, so I couldn't really hear what was happening around me, or
Right.
yeah, and I was quite distracted.
So what do you put that down to? What do you put the success of that experiment down to?
Well, yeah, I don't know if I'd be able to do it again if I didn't have my headphones with me. Because even kind of saying it now is making me feel quite anxious about it.
And keep in mind that's really normal. Thinking about dropping the use of your headphones, what would you be most afraid would happen if you didn't use them the next time you caught public transport?
Yeah, that people will actually come to ask me questions.
Absolutely.
And I just won't know what to say to them.
How would we find out once and for all whether that's likely to happen?
I guess I would have to go on the bus but not wear my headphones.
Absolutely.
I would still keep them in my bag. I don't know if I'm able to put them at home. Yeah, but I guess not wearing my headphones and just taking the bus.
I really like the way you're thinking about that, Adeline, that ultimately to really overcome your anxiety, we're going to need to drop that safety behaviour. But it sounds like at the moment you're not prepared to drop it completely. So a graded way would be to not wear them first up and keep them in your bag. And what would a next step from there look like?
Then I guess I would have to kind of try and leave the house without bringing them along.
Fantastic. Can we set that up this week as a task for you and come back next week and find out how it went?
But keeping them in my bag, yep. I guess I'd be willing to give that a go.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you, Adeline.
Cool. Thank you.